Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Schulenburg. I'm the Executive Director of the Society of Collision Repair Specialists, and thank you very much for being here this morning. It's been a fantastic SEMA. Who's had a great SEMA show? I love it. I want to say thank you to all the sponsors of our repair-driven education sessions that have taken place this week. On Tuesday and Wednesday, we've had some amazing classes and some amazing content, some really phenomenal speakers. And I'm looking forward to sharing some topics with you today and also talking about some of the things that SCRS has worked on. For anybody who's not familiar, SCRS is a national association. We represent collision repair businesses across the United States of America. I serve as the executive director of the organization, and our board of directors is a group of volunteers that are businesses that look a lot like yours. People who have been in this industry for a long time, who have found time to give back to the industry and try to make it better than it was when they entered into it. You'll find some material on your seats that talk a little bit about the association, and what you'll find is this research that we're going to talk to you about today is all a result of reinvesting that support that we get from our members back into the industry with information and material that can help in your business, okay? So before we get into it, before we start talking about blending and operations, I'm not gonna read word for word the antitrust guidelines, but I do wanna remind everybody that these are not directions, okay? This is not us coming to an agreement about pricing. It's not us talking about concerted action of that you should go back and implement into your business. What we're gonna be talking about are some billable operations, and we're gonna talk a little bit about information that you may wanna use back in your business at your own discretion in a variety of different ways. But do not take this as direction, do not take this as suggestion, okay? And we'll go from there. So blends. Blends are obviously very critical, otherwise you end up with this. And I have a 17-year-old son, and about a year ago, we were looking for vehicles on the marketplace, and this was an actual vehicle not too far from my home that was for sale on the marketplace, and I was looking, and as I was doing a lot of these presentations around blending, we're going, okay, well, this is exactly why we need to perform the operation, and I think everybody sitting in this room understands why we blend. The question that has existed for so many years is why blends are accounted for the way that they have been in the information systems, right? And we've had, our members have come to us for decades going, it doesn't make sense that blends would account for less time when they're so much more complicated to perform. It doesn't make sense that they would account for less time when it takes more skill, it takes more time in many cases, there are more operations involved. Why? And we've spent a lot of time addressing that question with the information providers, with CCC and Mitchell and Auditex. And for many years, they essentially said, look, we've done time studies on this, and we are comfortable with the time studies that we've performed, and we're not gonna change those time studies, which reflect a certain number and reflect a certain percentage. And so ultimately, we as an organization said, okay, we know that we've had countless members come to us and address this as a challenge. We know that every one of the Refinish companies has had their customers come to them and address this as a challenge. And it's time that somebody in the industry did some research and actually brought some logic to the conversation and documented the situation and attempt to see if we can re-spur how that conversation occurred. So what I'm gonna do today is I'm gonna walk you through our research process. I'm going to walk you through the presentation that we gave 2 years ago at the SEMA show when we delivered the results of that research process. And then I'm gonna walk you through the changes that have occurred since then. Then we're gonna talk a little bit about maybe some of the conversations that we're seeing shops have, some of the conversations that we're seeing them have with both bill payers, with customers, with departments of insurance, okay? And some of the ways in which they're documenting their files to demonstrate why they're performing what they're doing and why the tasks that they're performing align with what they saw as the results of the study, okay? I will preface this with, I think there are a lot of repair facilities who look at the study and they wanna go, we're changing our billing practice, and their answer is, well, the study says. And the study says is not a viable answer, right? The study was never intended to be simply what you point to. The study was meant to open up the conversation, to give you as repairers the ability to point to technical documentation, to point to the tasks that you're performing, to justify how and what you're billing, okay? So we're gonna go through some of those things, and hopefully at the end of this, you walk away with a little different insight where you can go back to your repair planners and talk with them about what your processes are and how you perform them and how they can have an educated conversation around the tasks. So let's first talk about the basis of the research. So as I said, August 2 years ago, SCRS went to all 5 refinish coatings manufacturers in the United States and said, we've got a problem. Our members have this concern. Do you have a problem as well? And all 5 said yes. So we asked them, are you willing to leave your marketing representatives at home, send some technical representatives, and work with us collaboratively with the other coating manufacturers to study the process of blend in comparison to the process of full refinish? And all 5 absolutely said, we would love to. This is an issue. We want to help address it, and we want to be part of the solution. I think it is one of the first times where you've had all 5 of those coating manufacturers work collaboratively on a study of this nature, which tells you the impact of this particular conversation, this particular process, this particular operation. This is a photo of all the individuals who were involved. We had 5 different repair facilities who were there just helping as SCRS board members. We had the 5 coatings manufacturers. We had folks from Global Finishing Solutions who hosted us there at their facility. And we had folks from a couple different organizations who were there helping. We also had DECRA, who is the world's largest testing, inspection, and certification company. You may be familiar with DECRA as they manage some of the OEM certified networks. You may be familiar with DECRA because they do lift inspections. You may be familiar with DECRA for a variety of different reasons. But we had hired DECRA to be a part of the process of evaluating how we would perform the study so that we could make sure that we had a third-party perspective that was used to auditing these types of processes, that was looking in and going, okay, that's a viable way to perform that process. It's a viable way to manage and measure it. And then we also had them audit the test as it was being performed. So we had people from DECRA on site, and they were basically watching, okay? So they're making sure that the process being performed in the booth was matching the process that was documented on paper. They're making sure that the time that was calculated when the stopwatch started and the stopwatch stopped matched what was being performed in the booth. They made sure that the number that was written down on the piece of paper matched what was on the stopwatch. They made sure that the percentages that we projected at the end of the research matched what they captured on site, right? So we went through and had them audit the whole process, made sure that we were following it. We wanted a level of scientific viability so that when we had this conversation, we knew people would poke holes at it, right? We knew there would be people who would challenge it. We knew that when you get the research in your hands and you're implementing it in the shop and you're talking to a bill payer about it, they're gonna come back and go, well, but SCRS isn't a testing company. We don't recognize them. Or they're gonna say, well, but they only used 5 paint companies, right? I mean, forget the fact that only 5 exist, right? And they're selling products. Anyhow, so we wanted to give as much scientific viability as we could behind it. And here's what we ultimately looked at. You're all familiar with CCC, Mitchell, and Auditex. And essentially, all 3 of them have the same thing in their systems, or did at the time, right? It was 50%, 50%, 50%. All 3 identified blends as 50% of the full refinish value, right? So if a full refinish value was 2 hours, the blend's an hour, right? It's half. We just didn't understand how that could be. Certainly didn't understand how all 3 of them could have the exact same figure, being that they're independently developing their labor times, and each of their blend included lists look entirely different from one another, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense how they could all come to that same conclusion, coming up with different labor values, having different included operations, and still come to that assessment. So that was the basis for the question, really. Now, all 3 of those guides are built on new and undamaged parts, on new and undamaged vehicles, right? That's how all 3 estimating guides are factored. So that's exactly what we did as well. We said we're gonna go new and undamaged parts on new and undamaged vehicles. So we were also worried that there may be questions surrounding how we picked the parts, right? And I've heard these as well, right? Well, they picked Ford parts, and Ford parts are bigger, or Ford parts are smaller, Ford parts are easier to paint, or Ford parts are harder to paint, right? Like whatever that answer is, we actually picked these parts for a particular reason. We went to the data and we said, okay, so we performed this study in 2022, it was partway through the year, so we looked at 2021 data. What was the most appraised vehicle? Well, it was a Nissan Sentra. Unfortunately, we were also going through a parts supply issue, right? And Nissan didn't have enough parts for the Nissan Sentra available to give us 45 parts or to take part in the study. Ford, on the other hand, had the most appraised truck of the year of 2021. So the 2018 Ford F-150 was the most appraised truck of 2021. And when I say most appraised, what I mean is it had the most estimates written on it, right? So we said, okay, that's a good data point. We're gonna take the truck that has the most amount of estimates written on it for that particular year, and we're gonna use that as our vehicle so that data chose that element rather than us making a selection. We then looked at what the most blended panels were, right? It's no surprise, it's hoods, doors, right? Things along those lines. So we chose which parts we were going to blend based on the data out of the estimating systems. We then picked the colors based on what the most popular color codes for a solid, a metallic, a solid, a metallic, and a three-stage paint. We picked the most popular color codes in those categories so that we could test each of those categories, but not have a bias around color, right? Because again, it becomes very easy to go, well, they picked an easy color to blend or a hard color to blend. We didn't. We picked the most common color in a solid category, a metallic category, and a three-stage category, because those are going to be the ones that we see in the field most frequently, right? So this is kind of what it looked like. You can see on the right-hand side of your screen there, you have the parts set up. As many of you do in your repair facility, when you're painting parts like this, you're gonna paint them off the vehicle, right? If you have the opportunity to do so. We set them up the way we would, where you have the door vertically, the fender vertically, the hood horizontally, right? We set them up, we tried to replicate as much as we could about the process. And this is how we approached the refinish process. Now, I think it's important to share with you, this was a comparative analysis of 2 refinish operations. This was not a refinish time study. What we were not studying was how much time does it take to paint this fender? How much time does it take to paint this door, right? We were not performing a time study to determine that it should be this many hours. We were comparing 2 operations because that's how it's written in the estimating systems, right? In the estimating systems, it says blends are 50% of the full refinish value. It doesn't say blends are X number of hours. So what we were comparing was what percentage, if we looked at what the full refinish value is on a door, a hood, and a fender, and we marked that as 100%, what percentage of that overall time was the blend? Was it 50%? Was it 100%? Was it 150%, right? Was it more, less, or the same? So we weren't doing a time study to come out with a labor value. We were doing a time study to do a comparative analysis between these 2 operations. Make sense? All right. There's other reasons why this was not a refinish time study. One example is right here. This is a DEG inquiry. I hope many of you are familiar with the DEG. If you're not, use that QR code on those pamphlets in front of you. That'll take you to our website. That will actually get you to the DEG site as well. But the DEG is a mechanism to address errors, inaccuracies, or questions on the estimating systems. It's a really excellent resource. It's also free to the industry to use, okay? But this was a DEG inquiry asking about refinish times, and Motor responded essentially that they look at a number of variables, okay? Panel size, material, shape, contour, position, color, and that those are all gonna be dependent on the actual individual panel that they're evaluating, okay? They also say that their time study information is proprietary and they can't share it. So we can't match a study that we don't have the information to, right? We can't perform it the same way. But what we can do is look at those variables that they looked at: panel, color, position, size, all of those things. Keep those in mind because they become important later in the conversation, okay? The other reason this was not a refinish time study was looking at this Auditex document from 2015, I believe. At the time, they were actually called Audit Explorer. But they did break down at that. They don't stand by these numbers any longer. They don't publish them any longer. But at the time in this 2015 letter, they had shared kind of the general breakout of refinish times. And what you'll see there is roughly, let's call it 35% of the time in their refinish times are for either administrative tasks, so a review of the job and the vehicle and the parts handling, gathering materials, operating the booth, moving and delivering the vehicle, and then final steps like cleaning up your workspace and cleaning up the booth and things along those lines, okay? We didn't measure those aspects. So this is part of why it's not a time study. It was a comparative analysis because we mostly looked at the application of refinish and the actual refinish process. We didn't have a vehicle. We weren't pulling a vehicle into the booth and out of the booth. We weren't getting it from a parking lot. We had new parts that we were unboxing out of a box, right? And we were going through this process. So there were things that were different than maybe that you would have in a regular production environment, but we looked at the things like prep, mix, application, and flash times. And that's what we studied when we compared the two, because really, that's where you're going to have differences or similarities between full refinish or blend. The rest of those things, you're gonna have to clean up regardless, all of that type of stuff. So in the comparison, we compared the percentage of the time to perform blend for color match to full refinish, okay? And we asked each of the paint companies who were involved to specifically follow the tasks that they ask of their shops out in the field to produce a warrantable refinish. So I think it's important to identify, obviously with 5 different paint lines, each of those lines is developed differently. They have different tasks and requirements and responsibilities. Some of them require a wet bed, some don't. Some of them require a solvent wash, some don't, right? There's different steps that each ask you to do, and some of them may even differ from their procedural documentation and their training that your painters will go through. So we said, look, we want each company to develop their own list of tasks that you expect, that you document, that you train to produce that warrantable refinish. Follow your own steps, right? Rather than creating a generic list of steps that may overlook that. Because we weren't necessarily looking, we're looking at each paint line individually, we're anonymizing them, and then we're looking at an overall average, okay? So each company developed their own list, and what you'll see is the list on the left is the list for full refinish. The list on the right, and this is for a hood specifically, the list on the right is for a blend. And you'll notice that the list for blend is longer. And part of that is because there are different preparatory steps that are involved, right, than you have in full refinish. You have a vehicle that's actually been in service, been on a roadway, collecting tar and grease, all these things on it, right? And you have to perform tasks like soap and water wash that you don't otherwise have to perform per most paint manufacturers' requirements on a new and undamaged part out of a box. New and undamaged part out of a box, you're most likely going to wipe it, you're gonna do a solvent wash, and it's gonna be ready to go, right? You're not gonna do a soap and water wash. I will tell you, for the repair facilities who were there, they're very good, high production facilities, right? They were all very familiar with the tasks that their painters are performing. Everybody knows they need to do a soap and water wash on used parts that are coming off of a vehicle. But how many of you actually have put out a chair and sat down, pulled out a stopwatch, and watched your painter do a soap and water wash on parts as they got ready for paint, right? You're familiar with it, you know it needs to be done, you're aware of what it takes. But every one of those participants said, it took longer than it took to actually spray material yesterday. Like it was just kind of this realization of something they all know happens, but how long it actually took to do a thorough job of cleaning really was remarkable in comparison to the time of application of material. These are the things that set this apart. This is what makes it more difficult. This is what makes it take more time, right? All right, so we looked at each color, we looked at these tasks, we looked at each company. You'll see on the left here, you'll see 100%, okay? That's basically our, what we identified as our full refinish value. And then the colored bars were the blend averages in comparison to full refinish value, okay? And we anonymized each of the companies. And the results here are for the solid Oxford White YZZ1. And what you'll see is the average blend on the solid white was 29.61% greater than the full refinish value. So when we compared the time it took to do one to the time it took to do the other, the blend took almost 30% more time than the full refinish did on that particular color. When we looked at the ingot silver metallic, which was code UX, it took 42.69% more time on average. So that's actually significantly more, right? We're gonna call that 13% more than the solid white did, in part because you have a more translucent color, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well, okay? But it's important to kind of take note of these numbers. On the white platinum tri-coat, it was 24.6% more time than full refinish. And I had a lot of people kind of go, well, wait, hang on, it's 3-stage. Why would 3-stage take less of a difference? Or less time is normally the question I would get. And keep in mind, this isn't about time, it's about differences, right? So it makes sense that a 3-stage would actually be less of a difference than full refinish versus more of a distance, because more of the time is spent applying material, right? So the things that set these different procedures apart may be preparation steps, washing steps, cleaning steps, things along those lines. So for a 3-stage where you have more time applying material, the difference is going to be less versus more from the full refinish value because you'll have a higher full refinish value on the 3-stage. Does that make sense? That's the type of conversation that it's valuable to have with your repair planner so that they can have those types of talks as well, right? Because if you looked at what Motor's statement was in that DEG inquiry about the variables changing, now if we can start arming our team with the ability to talk about what variables look like and talk about the difference between the difference on a 3-stage versus a more translucent silver metallic versus a solid white, we're now starting to talk about logic and science and the task and not just because of what the study says. All right, so the overall average on blending was about 31.59% greater than full refinish value. We averaged that to 32% more. And that QR code, by the way, will take you to the study if you use that, and you're gonna have that kind of throughout this presentation as well. And this QR code will actually take you right to it as well. So I'll put that up, it's a little bit bigger, and I'll let you guys use that. What I'll say is if I were to do this differently, if I were to look back at what we've learned since we released, because everything I just shared with you, we shared 2 years ago here at the SEMA show, okay? And if you haven't downloaded the study itself, I certainly encourage you to do so. Use this QR code, go pull the study, go make sure that you study it and read it and use it and circulate it within your business, circulate it within your community, all of those types of things. I think one of the things that maybe I would have looked at differently is we gave an overall average because it seems easy to communicate, right? It seems easy to take all that data and lump it together and go, on average, it was 32% more. But I think people get hung up on that. And they get hung up on that number in comparison to why we saw the information providers actually make changes. So, and that's going to be part of what we actually talk about, all right? So this is the conclusions and implications page of the study itself. It very simply tells you exactly that the conclusions of this study indicated that blending on average took 31.59% more time than the full refinish value, that the findings would suggest the contention that blending a panel should not receive less time than a full refinish panel is well-founded. Reduction of the refinish values reduces compensation for both labor and materials. I mean, that's just a fact. It's also something we identified in the study. But this also makes for good line note documentation for your repair plans, right? This becomes something that you can now look at and go, okay, I can take from a third-party source these statements, these are good notes, and it might look something like this. This was actually pulled off an actual repair plan. Note, and then it identifies www.sars.com/blend study, conclusion indicating blending on average took 31.59% more time than full refinish. The findings suggest that blending a panel should not receive less time than a full refinish panel. Reduction of refinish values reduces compensation for both labor and materials. A formula representing a blend operation at 50% of the refinish value is an inaccurate representation of the tasks performed in our facility. What's interesting about that to me, what I really like about that, is they made it about what their tasks are, right? This is not a reflection of the tasks performed in our facility, which means hopefully that they understand what those tasks are and they can speak to those tasks directly. And they're saying the study is reinforcing what they're doing in their facility, not that they're adjusting what they're doing because of a study, right? And there's a big difference between those two conversations. How you set that up changes the course of how that conversation goes going forward. I will say what's also interesting is to see how insurance carriers have utilized or referenced the study on their sheets as well. This was not a preliminary supplement, but an original estimate from an insurance company, and in it they noted they had adjusted the time to full refinish in this case. Note blend study, due to the blend study that determined blending a panel takes 31.59% longer than full refinish, and Motor's resulting commitment to removing the formula, they made the change. So there is a recognition here, not just of the study, but of the changes that have occurred within Motor and the estimating systems and things along those lines. So let's talk about some of the different systems. Let's talk about the changes that have occurred, okay? And also some of the things that you can point to along the way as you're having these conversations. So this is what the guide page used to look like. We're not gonna, I know that's tiny font, but that's where they used to say that it was 50% of the full refinish value. Well, in April 2023, Motor issued a press release after we had had lengthy conversation after the results of these studies. And that press release said, given the variations among scenarios today, Motor believes that the estimated work time development methodology should defer to the judgment of an estimator or appraiser following an on-the-spot evaluation of the specific vehicle and refinish requirements in question. So this means that it's a conversation about each vehicle and each refinish operation that you're performing on that vehicle. So think about, again, color of that vehicle. Not just in general, this is what our position is, but what's the color of that vehicle? And what are those specific needs? And how did you evaluate it? How did your painter evaluate it? How did your repair planner evaluate that, right? How did you come to whatever conclusion you came to about what you need to charge for blends based on all those variables? But what you have here is Motor saying, given the variations among the scenarios today, they believe that it should be an on-the-spot evaluation. Now keep in mind, those formulas were developed more than 30 years ago, before I was in this industry, okay? Like, it's one of those things where it is so dated. So this is a reflection of what a modern take on the vehicles that you're repairing today looks like. And that's really important as well, because start thinking about the cars that you fix today, the complexity of the colors. I mean, walk outside after you leave this class and go look at the richness, the beauty that exists, the artistry that exists in some of these colors, right? And how hard that is to match. There's a very big difference between what vehicles looked like 30 years ago and what they look like today, especially out of the factory on the floor. Think about 30 years ago, what vehicles cost, right? You didn't have $120,000 pickup trucks, but you do today. And consumer expectation is significantly different, right? You get a customer who comes in who spent $120,000 on a brand new pickup truck in a beautiful, deep pearl tri-coat color, right? Their expectation is very different than somebody who drove in a pickup truck 30 years ago, right, to your repair facility. So it's not just that variables have changed. It's not just that colors have changed. It's that vehicles have changed. Consumer expectation has changed. What you have to do to meet that has changed, and the complexity of all that has changed, right? The change that Motor talked about is designed to account for variations in modern vehicle paint refinishing and will be made in October of 2023, all right, as part of the company's standard Guide to Estimating update schedule, so a year ago. CCC, and this QR code will take you right to this article, actually. CCC and Motor to roll out on-the-spot blending operations beginning in October. And CCC said, we do support Motor's decision, and we think this is a good outcome for the industry as a whole and accurately reflects the variation in the process as Motor described in the release. Well, so I certainly have had a lot of members who have said, well, CCC didn't make any change. They said right here they did, and that they do support the decision, and they do think it's a good outcome for the industry. And this is why reading news and following along in these publications becomes so important, right? Like, this is great material for conversations that you may be having around this topic. This is justification or documentation, things that you can go back and use to have an educated conversation when somebody goes, well, CCC didn't change anything. Oh, wait, hang on. Let's take a look at this article from actually a year ago, right? And, you know, I think when they talk about it's a good outcome that reflects the variation in the process, think back to what we just reviewed, right? Solid white was under 30%. Metallic silver was over 40%. White tri-coat was around 25%, right? That reflects variation, doesn't it? We didn't come to the same result based on every color. We came to a variety of different results. The results are actually even spelled out. The variety is spelled out in the study itself, and I don't expect you to be able to see that, but if you go to that QR code that I put up earlier and you go download the study at scrs.com/blend study, all that variation exists, and we publicized it. We did what none of the other companies do. We performed research and then gave it to the industry. We didn't say it was proprietary. We didn't say it's secret. We said, here you go. And you now have this at your disposal to have that conversation. And all of these variations are a result of panel size, material, shape, contour, position, and color. So those are the things that I think as you start talking with your repair planner, talking with your painter, having them do in-services with each other. So my wife is a speech pathologist, and she's worked in hospital systems, she's worked in private practices, but one of the things they do in the healthcare system, they have in-services, where when you have multiple departments, the different departments teach each other what they do and how they do it so that they understand. So one day at lunch or in an evening function, the speech pathologist may hold an in-service and teach the nurse practitioner why they perform a certain procedure or go through a certain routine with a patient, right? And then on another in-service, that nurse practitioner may teach the orthopedic, surgery staff why they go through certain steps. But we don't do a lot of that, right? We don't do a lot of where we gather our teams together and have our painter teach our repair planner, have our body men teach our painters why they perform what they're doing, right? Have our ADAS technician learn from our repair planners why they're writing things the way they are or the obstacles that they have. And there's an opportunity there where if you take that skill and that knowledge that exists within your facility and create a structure for them to be able to share it with one another, they have a better understanding of the process, right? Because we're not sending a lot of our repair planners off to refinish schools, right? We're not sending them off to get the training that we may be sending our painter off to because it's hard. It's hard to send people away. It's hard to have them be non-productive while they're getting training. But I will say the more knowledge acquisition that occurs, I think the better opportunity there is for them to share that where it matters in these conversations. So let's look at a couple of those things that maybe folks would gain from talking with their painters. So this is actually a shot from the blend study itself. You'll see how the panels are set up. You'll also, I didn't talk about this, but we did mask the panels. We didn't mask them on the full refinish because the full refinish, you're gonna paint the inside. We masked them on the blend panels because you don't wanna get overspray on the inside of the panels, obviously. But you'll see here in this example, this particular refinish company, not all of them require this, on this color, not on all colors, requires you to put the sealer on the leading edge of the blend panel to create a more invisible transition because this was the silver. And in that silver color, it's more transparent. And if you don't, with their particular system, if you don't put that sealer on the leading edge, you're not gonna have as good of a transition between the panels. Well, how many people know that or communicate that? When you're having a conversation around things like blending and taking more time, how many of these pictures exist in your repair planner's office for them to be able to say, well, let me show you. Let me show you what's different about this that I wouldn't do on this. We just kind of like default to, well, it's harder and it takes more time and, I bet you couldn't do it and so on and so forth, right? This is a way to start to have an informed conversation around the differences in tasks between full refinish and refinishing for color match. Here's another example. This was actually a photo that was submitted to the DEG in an inquiry that came through, but it's another great example of that type of operation and what would need to be performed to blend or refinish for color match into that panel. But aside from just the pictures of the documentation of what's actually occurring in your shop, there's also technical information that supports these tasks as well, right? So this is a document from one of the refinish companies. And if applying sealer to the replacement panel, and if applying sealer directly adjacent to the blend panel, then you need to blend the sealer onto the edge of the blend panel. Well, this is no longer you just showing a picture and somebody going, well, why are you doing that? Nobody else is doing that. You don't need to do that. This is technical documentation that shows you why you're doing it and that you need to. This is actually a slide that I stole out of a presentation that we had done at the Collision Industry Conference, and I left their logo on there because I wanted to make sure we gave them credit because there's a lot of good things that happen at CIC meetings where the industry talks about the challenges we're having. And this was a particular panel where we had BASF and Axalta and AkzoNobel all on stage. We also had State Farm on stage and a repair facility on stage, all just kind of talking about the challenge of educating and discussing this particular issue. And each of the paint companies were charged with sharing a little bit of information that helped communicate some of the differences that you're dealing with in colors today. And as you can see on that particular panel, this was a section of the presentation that talked about pastels, but you can actually see the blend line in the middle of that panel, right? And with the pastels, it's especially difficult because it's not just a matter of whether the color matches, it's whether the droplets of paint applied correctly to match the rest of it, because the shadows make a big difference. And Ryan with AkzoNobel had shared this slide, and I just thought it was really phenomenal. So on the right-hand side there, you see two different colors, right? You see a chip on the top that's gray, and you see a chip on the bottom that's white. But sometimes light can be confusing to our eyes. And if you block out the angle, that color becomes the same, right? Visually. It's only a matter of how the light's hitting it and how it reflects. And so if you don't take the time and the care when you're blending to not just match the color, right, but to match the actual application and surface and all of those things, you'll end up with a color that appears not to match, even in the blending process and especially in the blending process. You can perform this same task even without this slide. If you look at, in a lit room, if you look at a corner, right, your eye, if you're standing far away, you see two different colors, or you'll see the same color on two walls that meet up in a corner like this, right? But if you kind of like look through a circle at those the two walls look like they're different colors, and you can make that go away visually, but it's a way to communicate it as you're having this conversation. With this come technical tips from the refinish manufacturer on exactly how to perform it, right? And so they go through and they walk through that process. So I think it's really important that you take the resources that are available to you. So it's your painter's understanding, it's what you're performing, it's pictures of the tasks that you're doing, along with technical documentation and training from your refinish manufacturer, and maybe research or resources out of the trade press or presentations that have been done in other venues that you can then share and pass along to others, okay? So as a result of all of this, we now have an updated page within CCC1 that now says color blend is based on the judgment of an estimator and an on-the-spot evaluation, where it used to have a percentage. That percentage isn't there anymore. You can't find it. It doesn't exist, okay? Same with three-stage. They have the same update in the three-stage area. And even CCC put together a job aid that walks through the process of how to go about setting your settings if you want to set them directly. And the job aid basically walks you through this. Now, I've heard arguments from people that say, well, look, they still default to 50 and 70%. But just because the system is set where that's where it starts, it's obviously intended to be at your discretion. It's obviously intended to be adjusted. That's why they have sliders, right? And it says so in the job aid, and it says so in the instructions on how to utilize it. Those numbers are not a direction or an indication that that's what should continue to be being used. But we still continue to find contention around that and pushback around that and challenges around that. And so we again went, okay, how do we make this really clear? How do we remove the gray out of this? How do we turn this into a black and white conversation? These are the facts. So we put together this slide deck. That QR code will take you right to these slides, okay, that we call changes in black and white, that has specific questions, specific answers, and the resource of where that came from, okay? So the first question, did Motor Information Systems conduct research on the estimated work time development methodology for color blend of adjacent panels? The answer is yes. Throughout the first quarter of 2023, Motor reviewed information from multiple sources, and that QR code takes you to that quote so that you can document it, okay? Did Motor change the estimated work time development methodology for color blend of adjacent panels from how it was previously expressed prior to April 2023? Yes. Motor announced today it will make a change to the estimated work time development for color blend of adjacent panels with the Motor Guide to Estimating. The change is designed to account for the variations in modern vehicle paint refinishing. We talked about that. Here's the QR code that takes you to that quote. Did Motor change how the estimated work time development methodology for color blend of adjacent panels was expressed in the Guide to Estimating? Yes. The estimated refinish times for color blending should defer to the judgment of an estimator or appraiser following an on-the-spot evaluation, and the QR code takes you to that documentation. Did Motor change how the estimated work time development for color blend of adjacent panels was expressed in the Guide to Estimating? Yes, they did on 3-stage as well. Can Motor define what entails a judgment time following an on-the-spot evaluation? Now, this didn't come from their document. This came from a DEG inquiry where somebody asked this question. But that's where resources like the DEG become so valuable, right? So when they say blend should be based on an on-the-spot evaluation and judgment time, well, what does that mean? Because I've heard a lot of businesses who come in and go, well, our on-the-spot evaluation is that it should stay the same, right? The reality is that Motor says a judgment time would be the outcome reached when an estimator or appraiser considers the specifics of the vehicle and the repair or refinish operation being evaluated to determine the estimated work time. So if you just come in and go, our policy is X, well, that's not really doing that, is it? It's not really following that guide. It's not actually considering the specifics of that vehicle. And if you're in a position to go, well, we've actually determine the specifics of this vehicle. It's color code UX, and this is the requirement, and this is what we do, and this is what our paint manufacturer says, and so on and so forth. You're now in a better position to actually follow what Motor is suggesting in this answer, right? And to have a, again, informed conversation around it. This is the DEG inquiry where they ask, can Motor define what entails a judgment time? Does Motor intend for the absence of a defined time to default to previously published and now removed formulas? We already gave this answer of what a judgment time is. Motor's response was Motor removed the previously published color blend formulas after determining they may not reflect the many variations encountered with modern vehicle finishes and designs. Citing these variations, Motor does not intend to publish a list of included or excluded items specific to color blend. So Motor said, we removed the previously published color blend formulas after determining that they may not reflect the current modern variations. This is a valuable item to be able to have in your arsenal in your conversations around this topic. This is where you can find that documented quote in that DEG inquiry. All right. Has Motor ever defaulted to a judgment time following an on-the-spot evaluation for other operations, right? Because I've heard some go, well, they've never done this before. Well, that's not true either. They've done it in their Refinish time listings where they talk about on-the-spot evaluations. They've done it in their add if required section where they talk about on-the-spot evaluations. How about welder setup and welding preparation? They talk about on-the-spot evaluations because of the variations that exist between equipment and processes. What about stone chip guard material? They don't give you a time for that. That's an on-the-spot evaluation that you need to determine based on how thick, how much, where it's located, all those things. What about windshield glass? They don't give you a time to remove, to clean it up and to remove the mounting studs, to clean the glass, all of those types of things. It's an on-the-spot evaluation. So they've certainly defaulted to on-the-spot evaluations before where there's variables that exist. It's not new, and I think it's actually a reasonable thing here because of the variations that do exist between processes. Now, just because there's variations doesn't mean you can't come up with what you are willing to do to make it easier and more consistent. Like, you could certainly decide these are all the variables and this is our process to assess the variables and this is what we're willing to do. You can do whatever you want within your business, right? The reality is that assessing those variables makes a lot of sense. Has CCC, yes sir. Okay, so the question is, why doesn't CCC just change the times? And I think the answer is, modern refinishing doesn't have a set time for blend at this point. There are a lot, as you saw in our own study, some were 42% more, some were 25% more. Blends were never a labor time, right? They were never established as it's this much time, it was always a percentage of. And now, if you look at that, again, the blending may actually be more on one color than it is on another. In my opinion, it's not the easiest, but this is actually the most logical solution for you to be able to address within your business what it is that you need to compensate your technician appropriately. And if you have all these tools and resources, what I can tell you is that there is a pathway to having a conversation where you can, like anything else, like you think back, we've talked a lot about scanning here at the SEMA show over the course of the last 5, 6, 7 years. And scanning as a conversation 7 years ago was very different than it was this year, right? Like there was a lot of, and I'm not saying that is resolved or perfect or anything along those lines, but what I can tell you is those conversations evolve, and the more consistent you are, the more informed you are about your process, the more solid you are with your folks about what it is that you're expecting them to communicate, the easier that conversation becomes. I'm gonna show you a couple more pieces that you can use to have that dialogue as well, okay? So the next question was, has CCC released an update that reflects Motor's revision? Because I've definitely heard objections going, well, CCC never made a change. Well, they did. Per Motor's revision, the refinish time associated with color blend will defer to the judgment of an estimator, right? But we still get these types of change requests that come through. Please change it back to the CCC database times. We just spent 40 minutes talking about the fact that there are not CCC database times for blends anymore. You can't find them. You can't go into the CCC system and find blend times. So a change request from someone who says, please go back to the CCC times, doesn't understand that those times don't exist. Well, instead of looking at it as just objection or pushback, that's an opportunity to educate. Well, let's go through the system. Let's look at it. Let's look at what's changed. Let's walk through all these steps that we just reviewed here, right? Let's look at what's changed since then and why I can't default to what their time is, because they don't have a time, they don't have a percentage, and it is purely left to us evaluating the situation. Now let's talk about what this situation requires, okay? So I think this is, I'm gonna recount for you communication back and forth. This is actually a case that went to a Department of Insurance. The shop had adjusted their repair plan to account for the increased blend times. The insurance company objected to those increased refinish times. It ended up in a complaint at the Department of Insurance, and a letter from the insurance company to the department said, I blanked out the names of the insurance companies and the shops here, okay, because this is still an ongoing dialogue. But it basically says the shop states that we're reducing refinish times on blends and repair panels. Our selected information provider, this is coming from the insurance company, okay? Our selected information provider, Mitchell, has reviewed the blend study and advised labor times have continued to be proven valid as published. Mitchell has shared that they determined when the presentation times are adjusted for included and or overlapping operations such as gun cleaning, flash time, material mixing, etc., the blend formula provided a labor allowance that was sufficient. We completed an on-the-spot evaluation of the vehicle, and our appraiser deemed the blend time to be sufficient. If the shop wishes to provide information on this particular repair to support the increased refinish times for the blended or repaired panels, we'll review it for consideration, okay? So the repair facility went through and said, okay, well, how do I address this to the Department of Insurance to help them understand what I evaluated? Because this is all the insurance company has communicated and all they've provided. So they went through and they responded with a letter. We appreciate the opportunity to respond to this insurance company's letter. We're in a unique circumstance where we as the repair facility and the insurance company do not use the same estimating platform. The insurance company has elected to estimate claims utilizing the Mitchell estimating system. Their choice of estimating system does not dictate the market or even represent most of the marketplace. Our facility bills for our services utilizing the CCC1 estimating system, which is also the predominant estimating platform based on market share. CCC, which operates off the Motor Information Systems database, does not provide blend times any longer, right? So now they're using all the stuff that we talked about to communicate their point. In April of 2023, Motor publicly announced throughout the first quarter of 23, Motor reviewed information from multiple sources and announced a change to the estimated work time development methodology for color blend of adjacent panels within the Motor Guide to Estimating. The change is designed to account for the variations in modern paint refinishing and will be made in October of 2023 as part of the company's standard GTE update schedule. So they're establishing this change occurred. They evaluated it, right? Shop continues in their letter. As a result, CCC instructs that estimated refinish times for color blending should defer to the judgment of an estimator or appraiser following an on-the-spot evaluation of the specific vehicle and refinish requirements in question. Motor defines a judgment time as the outcome reached when an estimator or appraiser considers the specifics of the vehicle and repair time, and Motor has also clearly indicated that Motor removed the previously published color blend formulas after determining they may not reflect the many variations encountered with modern vehicle finishes and designs. That means that Motor did not feel previously published times were sufficient, okay? So they're using all the documentation to communicate why they're making these adjustments in their system. The insurance company claims they completed an on-the-spot evaluation of the vehicle and deemed the blend time to be sufficient. The insurance company did not provide any detail of what was evaluated to make such a determination or provide sufficient supporting documentation. At our facility, this is the shop, right? At our facility, an on-the-spot evaluation considers variables such as panel size, material, shape, contour, position, and color, right? All the things that we also talked about earlier. And then we apply those considerations in accordance with Axalta's technical data sheet. So now they're pulling in their refinish manufacturer's documentation. On this 2022 Lincoln metallic gray, the paint code is FM. So now we're talking about the specific vehicle, right? Metallics require extra room and more product for the blend than a solid color as well. We also note in the SERS study that the silver metallic variants resulted in the greatest percentage over full refinish as a result of the translucence and color requirements. These variables are part of what the shop takes into account in the formulation of blend time when considering the Axalta Spies-Hecker color blending process. So if you look at the actual process from the refinish company, The three items that are highlighted in the middle are blend steps that aren't on a full refinish value, right? So one is mixing the blender. Refer to the blender and reducer selection charts to select appropriate products for current booth climate conditions. So again, another variable. Booth climate conditions is gonna be different in different areas of the country. It may be different on different days. It may be different on different seasons. What it takes to blend that vehicle in the spring may look different than what it takes to blend that vehicle in the fall or the summer, right? So those are some specific variables that you may be considering, your painter may be considering, your repair planner may want to consider. There's the blend and additive that needs to be added, right? There's all this information. You need to replace up to 5% reducer with the water 6000 in extreme conditions, whether it's hot or dry. So now we're talking about, again, environmental conditions that may make changes that you need to talk about. None of that's necessary outside of that. Now you need to apply the blender, right? So you apply the blender to the entire surface of the panel with the exception of the surfacer areas. I think there's this expectation sometimes that all you're doing is applying material to an edge of a panel to blend, right? They don't think about you're still applying material to the entire panel many times, and that may be different materials than what you would be applying if you were doing a full refinish. You would apply one even thin closed coat from 4 to 6 inches working from the bottom to the top. You wouldn't allow the blender to flash. You would route the vehicle blending one zone at a time, right? So there's all these considerations. Blend color, all right? So you want to spray 2 to 3 control coats, 10 to 14 inches from the panel. Use an outside-in approach, extending the first coat furthest. Follow each subsequent coat by fading in from a previous coat. Overlap 75% through the entire process. So now you have very specific instructions that the other individuals that you're talking about likely don't have access to and certainly haven't considered when they come in and just kind of go, well, we have a policy that, right? Now you're setting yourself up to be the professional that you are and have a conversation in a very professional manner about a task that's being documented as taking more time than maybe was previously thought, and you're providing the reasons why. It's not because the study said, it's because of what you're doing, right? It's not because of what the study said, it's because of what you're doing. And all of that was provided in conjunction with this letter, and the letter continued. Blending in general requires more attention to detail and a higher level of surface preparation on blend panels, as well as more skill to achieve an undetectable blend, creating a uniform transition from the refinish color to the factory color. We also consider Axalta's recommendations for blending base coat, which further specify that, quote, there are many things that can affect the way a color appears between the time it is mixed and the time it's applied to the vehicle. The temperature range, amount of reducer added, the air pressure used to apply, as well as the application technique can all change the appearance of the color. That can mean that you tinted it perfectly, right? It can mean that you matched it perfectly, but applying it may have variations within the process as well. And now you can communicate all that from this type of information. Here's the document that that's quoted out of, right? And so you can take these recommendations and now apply this as part of your justification. Our painters and repair planners address these variables together, but do not recall having such a conversation with the insurance company. Axalta has additionally indicated to our facility that, quote, Axalta participated in the blend study sponsored by SCRS and followed the TDS and standard operating procedures associated with all repairs. The results of that study were an accurate representation of our results. So now you have a party who is a participant who provides the product that the shop is using, saying that we participated in the study and this study did in fact represent the results. I can tell you, while you have an information provider, so you have an insurer saying that Mitchell is saying that the study results aren't accurate, Mitchell wasn't present. They were invited, they were not present, okay? So you have now a company who is creating the material who is saying we were there and the results did reflect what we saw and did follow our procedures, right? And all of this was provided. And here's the position from Axalta that says such, right? That we participated, the results of the study were an accurate representation of the results. The letter continues, it's also important to note that while the insurance company's choice of estimating platform has not changed its default settings for blend, they have acknowledged that the end user needs to adjust times based on variables. In January of 2024, so just earlier this year, Mitchell announced at a collision industry conference meeting that, quote, next month we will release enhancements to Mitchell Cloud estimating for refinish operations designed to offer users greater flexibility and control over labor time calculations, and these enhancements make it possible for collision damage appraisers to adjust all 7 common refinish calculations in the estimating profile, including blend of an adjacent panel as well as Dean and finesse. If it wasn't necessary to make these adjustments, there wouldn't be a need to create a function to make the adjustments, right? So all of this is to say, this is really thorough documentation in response back to go, this is why we're doing what we're doing in our repair facility, right? Now, you have no idea what they're charging. We never talked about that, and it doesn't really matter. What does matter is they were in a position to share what they needed to share. Yes, sir. No, we did actually invite all three information providers. All three declined to join us, which is totally fine. But we did want to make it, we planned to publish the results no matter what the results were. We wanted to let them know they were welcome to come and monitor if they wanted to come see it happen. Yep. But I think the point really is that the other two also adjusted their perception on blend percentages as a result of the study and other research that they did coming out of it, right? So they gave credibility. They said, these results actually speak loudly. We're going to make adjustments as a result. Okay, these are the profile settings. Again, just more documentation. These are the profile settings that changed that they were referencing in the letter. I also want to talk about Solera for a moment, Auditex, because Auditex also made changes as well. In an article that took place late last year, Solera Product Management Senior Director David Devuti told Repair Driven News that Solera, by the way, Repair Driven News is also a SCRS publication, another example of where we take our member support, our member dues, and reinvest them back into the industry. David Devuti told Repair Driven News that Solera was already aware of the concerns SCRS and other repairers had for months, if not years, prior to the release of the blend study. So nobody was surprised that we went down this path, right? Like, collision repair facilities have for years said, I don't get it. Why is blending less than full refinish? Examples of feedback he cited were paint and refinish operations becoming more complex because of matte finishes, 4-stage refinishing, and very deep reds, all which require a lot more labor time. Well, that's a valuable sentiment that may be worth going back to those articles and understanding. What we found is it varies. So while some might say, hey, we're just going to change it to be this value, what we really found is it actually may change depending on your book of business and what you're doing. We did leverage the existing 50%, which has been set for quite some time, but recognizing that there is a need, especially if your book of business warrants it, as a shop, you can now go and update that. Well, I would maybe consider that if you are working on anything other than 30-plus-year-old vehicles, your book of business might warrant it, right? Like, because those blend times were established more than 30 years ago, and we talked about all the things that have changed since then. So book of business may look like high-end vehicles. It may look at color types of vehicles. It may look at a large variety of things. Book of business may also be customer types that you're working with and what their expectations are and what they're looking for from you. I think there are certainly going to be some differences depending on what type of collision repair facility you have, and all of those things that will certainly, this helps justify that. So what Auditex now says is that it's based on new and undamaged vehicles. Auditex estimating does not provide a standard labor allowance for blended panels, as this requires the estimate preparer's judgment, expertise, and consideration of the unique requirements of each repair. Very similar to what we've already talked about today, right? It's an on-the-spot evaluation based on unique requirements of that vehicle. Auditex will now allow you to specify the blend refinish percentage to be used when calculating blend refinish labor at the profile level, allowing insurers and shops to agree on a default blend refinish time. You may enter a value between 50% and 150%. So they limited where on the range that you can't go below 50%, you can't go above 150%, but they give you the ability to adjust that and set that as a setting. When generating an estimate, the blend refinish will be calculated using the value specified at the profile level. If you have not set the settings, it will default to 50%. So if you don't go in and establish what that should be, then it will default to the 50%. This is where you would go in and address the settings, right, in the setup, in Captor. There will be a line note at the bottom, because if you set a different setting than maybe the bill payer did, you may have a discrepancy on that repair plan, and so there will be a note that tells exactly what the refinish setting was, so that if you see that your refinish labor is off, it now gives an opportunity to go and say, oh, well, we had ours set at X, and you had yours set at Y, and there's a discrepancy, and now we can have a conversation about why, right? Using all the facts and details that we talked about earlier. Okay, I've provided you, in a large degree, most of what we have covered at this point. A lot of the information that you can use, a lot of the things you consider. I'm not saying use just what I provided, okay? What I'm saying is think about all the things at your disposal. Think about all the resources that you have. Think about all the ways that you can have these conversations to make your repair planner more informed, to make your refinish technician more informed, to make your the folks that you have relationships with, that you're having these conversations with, more informed. This is from that same CIC panel that I mentioned that we had in July earlier this year, where really the headline out of the story was training and communication could be key to helping shops get accurate pay for blending. And in that conversation, you had a repair facility basically say, as we've taken a more active approach in providing this information, we've found less resistance, right? We found a way to kind of take the information and get to a place where people better understand. You had BASF and State Farm on the stage, where BASF has done a lot of work with them to help educate around these processes. And I think that comment really came from the representative from State Farm who's there, who was basically like, what we see is as we're provided more of this information, there's so much of this in the industry, right? There's people who just like, they come in with a perspective, they come in with a position, and they're just stuck there. And if we can take the time to provide more information and to not be so stuck and instead share and educate and help train each other, we can kind of whittle away at some of that resistance. And I'm not saying that's perfect, and I'm not saying it's gonna go away tomorrow. I'm not saying there's an easy button here. I can tell you this. The blend study was never designed to be something where you just simply point to it and it changes your world. The blend study was designed to open the conversation that had been previously closed. We had gone to information providers. Information providers had said, we've performed studies and we're not gonna budge. That was it. That was the end of the conversation. And we said we wanted to perform research that opened the door to more conversation. And that's exactly what it did, right? As a result of the research, the information providers reevaluated, they made changes, and now you have a different conversation to have than you did 2 years ago. It wasn't designed to be, well, the study says, and so I get, right? And I think that's where some people, it didn't work because they're not able to do that. I think there is work involved in this. There's not an easy solution, but I think if you start to like make a pathway to how you're going to share. And that's not just relative to blends, it's relative to everything, right? If you as the repair professional can put resources in the hands of the folks who you're entrusting in having the conversation with others, make them more informed, make them more well-trained, make them understand how to have critical thought and critical debate, I think you're in a good position to see a different outcome at some point as you become consistent in those conversations. I will tell you, sometimes it doesn't always resolve just because you educate. And here's an example. This is different from the other one that we spoke about earlier, but this was an example where, again, a claim went to the Department of Insurance. The insurance company basically said, we're not gonna cover for these adjusted blends. And the Montana Department of Insurance addressed it and refuted the unsupported claims from the insurance company, and ultimately ruled that the shop justified what they were doing and why, right? So I think there are positive outcomes that can occur there. And as you go through those processes, I think it becomes easier as you kind of like cross more and more of those bridges. We're seeing folks who have experienced that. We're also seeing folks who haven't. My encouragement to you is take the information that you gained this week in this class and other classes, bring it back, evaluate it, see how it fits, make your own decision and determination within your business of what you'd like to see, a result that you want to accomplish, and figure out a way to implement it. As I said, this study was paid for, supported by the Society of Collision Repair Specialists, and really by our members. We took our members' dues and reinvested it back into the industry to make a difference for everybody, not just for our members, but for everybody involved in this industry. There are a lot of programs that this association does that are designed to better the industry, to better the people within it, to lift everyone up. I highly encourage you, if you're not a member, today would be a great opportunity to join. If you are not a member, I certainly encourage you to visit our booth, 31147, because there are folks in there, our board members who are repair facilities just like you, our staff members, all sorts of people who would love to talk to you about what the association does. Yes, sir. So I am very aware of many people who have been very successful in having conversations similar to what we've talked about today, utilizing the information in their own way, utilizing the information to justify what they're performing in their facilities. And again, I would be happy for anybody who wants to discuss it further. I would be glad to meet you at the SERS booth. We can talk a little bit over there. So could any of the folks who are involved in the organization. I think there are certainly a lot of different points that can be shared, such as these, that can change the outcome of the conversations. So the objective today was not to talk about what we're going to charge or to not talk about the specific steps that we're going to take, right? But what we do want to do is provide the information for you to be able to take that and address it within your own business. I think, yeah, I'll take one more, Lucky. Ultimately, it's about taking the information into your business and deciding who you want to have that conversation with and how. All right, so here's the takeaway. Bring the information back home, share it with your team, talk about your strategy of what you're looking to accomplish. Thank you all very much for your time. We greatly appreciate you.